Escape attempts that shocked Rikers, the daring ones who almost broke free. The night was silent, but inside Rikers Island, silence never lasted long. The metal buzz of the gates, the constant shuffle of guards' boots, and the whispers of men planning things they weren't supposed to, those sounds lived in the air. But one night in the mid-1980s, something happened that shook the jail to its core. An inmate, known for being both reckless and clever, made it farther than anyone ever thought possible. He actually slipped past locked doors, past cameras, and made it all the way to the outer wall. For a split second, freedom was only a jump away. Imagine it. His hands gripping the cold concrete, heart racing as he pulled himself up. On the other side, the lights of New York City glimmered like a promise. He was seconds away from escaping Rikers Island, something that almost no one had ever done. But just as his feet touched the top of the wall, a beam of light froze him in place. A guard's flashlight swept across the yard, and the alarm blared like thunder. Inmates pressed against their bars, shouting and cheering, as the sirens filled the night. What happened next would decide everything. How did he get this far in the first place? And what kind of man dares to try and escape from one of the toughest jails in America? To understand that, we need to rewind. Back to the days before the wall, before the alarm, before the climb. This man wasn't always desperate. Like so many others inside Rikers, his story began with mistakes on the streets of New York. Arrested in a robbery gone wrong, he thought he'd only be in jail for a short while. But the charges stacked up, and suddenly he was staring at years locked behind bars. Inside Rikers, the days dragged. He saw fights break out over food, guards roughing up inmates, and the endless routine of head counts and lockdowns. At first, he kept his head down. He followed the rules, didn't draw attention, and waited for the courts. But slowly, the weight of Rikers pressed down on him. The noise, the violence, the hopelessness. It felt like the jail itself was designed to crush every ounce of spirit. That's when the idea of escape first started growing inside him. At first, it was just a dream. Then, it became a plan. He began studying the guards, watching their patterns. When they walked the tiers, when they took smoke breaks, when they dozed off at their desks. He traded favors with other inmates for bits of information. Which locks were old and weak? Which doors didn't quite shut right? He built the blueprint in his mind. But he couldn't do it alone. Rikers was too big, too dangerous. One slip meant disaster. So, he whispered his plan to a few trusted cellmates. Some laughed, calling him crazy. Others warned him that escape attempts almost always ended in beatings, solitary or worse. But one inmate, young, bold, and just as desperate, said yes. Together, they began preparing. They kept their voices low, sharing ideas late at night when the block went quiet. They created distractions, arguments staged in the day room, fake requests to medical, anything to learn how the guards moved when chaos struck. Slowly, the dream began to feel possible. Then, one night, something happened that pushed him from planning into action. A brutal fight erupted in the block. Two rival groups clashing with fists and shanks. Guards stormed in, dragging men out and locking down the tier. But in the chaos, he noticed it. One of the side gates hadn't been secured properly. The lock didn't click. That was the moment. His heart pounded as he stared at it from his cell. For weeks, he had been preparing. For weeks, he had been waiting. And now, right in front of him, was the opportunity he thought might never come again. Would he take the risk? Or would he wait, knowing that a chance like this might never return? And with that choice burning in his mind, the stage was set for one of the most daring escape attempts Rikers Island had ever seen. The block was buzzing after the fight. Guards were still shouting, dragging bloodied inmates down the tier, while others slammed doors shut with loud metallic bangs. In the middle of all that noise, He kept his eyes fixed on the side gate, the one that hadn't been locked. His cellmate leaned closer, whispering under his breath, "You see it too, right?" He nodded, trying to keep his face calm. His heart was beating so hard it felt like everyone in the block could hear it. If the guards noticed that gate before morning, the chance would vanish. And if he tried and failed, it wouldn't just mean solitary. It could mean years added to his sentence. When the lights dimmed and the night count passed, the tear went quiet. This was it. He slid off his bunk, pressed his ear to the bars, and listened. One guard was at the far end, his footsteps fading. The other was sitting in the control booth, the faint glow of a cigarette in his hand. That was the opening. His cellmate gave a small nod. They had rehearsed this moment in whispers for weeks. The first move was the most dangerous, slipping out of the cell without being seen. He had bribed a friendly inmate trustee days earlier for a piece of wire, just long enough and thin enough to work the lock. Now, with shaking hands, he fed the wire into the cell door's edge. A click echoed, soft but sharp. The door cracked open. They froze, waiting. The guard in the booth didn't move. The sound of the TV carried through the glass, masking their tiny noise. They stepped out, every muscle tight, every breath heavy. The gate was just ahead, the one they had seen left ajar. When he reached it, his stomach dropped. The chain was still looped, but the padlock wasn't closed. Whoever had rushed to secure it during the fight had done a sloppy job. He slipped the chain loose and pulled the gate open just wide enough for both of them to slide through. The clang of the chain rattled in the silence, and both men froze again. The cigarette ember in the booth glowed brighter. The guard shifted, stood up, and looked around. For a terrifying moment, it felt like the world had stopped. But then the guard sat back down, turning his attention back to the TV. They moved forward, their hearts pounding louder than the alarms they feared would erupt any second. They were no longer in their housing unit. They were in the service corridor, a place meant only for staff. The air smelled of bleach and metal, and every step echoed too loud. One wrong move and they would be caught. The younger cellmate whispered, "We're really doing this." He didn't reply. He couldn't. His mind was racing ahead, trying to picture the map of Rikers, the walls, the fences, the patrols. He had studied the rhythms of the place for months, but this was different. This was real. Every second that passed made the escape more dangerous, but also more possible. And then, just when it felt like their plan was working, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Not theirs. From the far end of the corridor, a flashlight beam suddenly cut through the dark. A guard was heading straight for them. Would they run? Would they hide? Or was this the end of their daring escape before it had truly begun? The beam of the flashlight sliced through the darkness, bouncing off the bleach-stained walls. Both men froze in place like statues. Their hearts hammered, but neither dared to breathe too loud. The guard's footsteps grew louder, steady and unhurried, echoing closer with every step. They had seconds to decide. Running would give them away instantly. The sound alone would alert the whole block. But standing there, out of place in a staff corridor, was just as dangerous. One wrong move and the guard's beam would land on their faces. The younger inmate's eyes darted to a cleaning closet door only a few feet away. Without a word, he grabbed the handle and yanked. It creaked open just enough for both of them to slip inside. The smell of mop water and disinfectant hit their noses as they pressed themselves into the darkness. The guard's light swept across the corridor outside. They could see the glow slipping in through the crack of the closet door. It stopped. The guard had paused. The sound of jangling keys rattled as he adjusted his belt. Then came a cough, a muttered curse, and finally, the footsteps resumed, fading down the hall. They waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Neither moved, terrified that even the scrape of a shoe would bring the guard back. When they finally pushed the door open, the corridor was empty again. The older inmate wiped sweat from his forehead. "We can't waste time. The shift change is coming." They moved quickly now, every nerve on fire. Ahead lay the service exit that led to the yard. He had studied this door countless times during his work detail. If they could reach it, they would be one step closer to the outer perimeter. But as they approached, a new problem rose. A heavy metal door with a lock far stronger than anything they had practiced on. Unlike the sloppy gate, this one was secured. There would be no easy slip through. The younger one whispered, "What now?" He pulled the piece of wire from his pocket again, but deep down he knew it wasn't enough. Still, he tried, working the lock, bending and twisting until his fingers cramped. The hallway seemed to grow louder with every second. The buzz of lights, the hum of pipes, his own breathing, then click. The lock gave way. They pushed the door open and were hit by cold night air. The yard stretched before them, silent, with the towering outer wall in the distance. Freedom was there, so close they could almost taste it. But the yard wasn't empty. A searchlight suddenly swept across the ground, illuminating the razor wire that lined the fences. They ducked low, hearts racing. The towers were manned. Guards with rifles scanned the darkness, their beams crisscrossing the yard like traps. If they wanted to cross, they'd have to time it perfectly. One mistake, one beam catching them, and the whole prison would explode into chaos. The younger inmate looked at him, eyes wide. "Are we really gonna do this?" He clenched his jaw, staring at the outer wall that stood between them and freedom. "We didn't come this far to stop now." And with that, they began to crawl across the cold ground, inching closer to the most dangerous part of their escape, the open yard under the watchful eyes of Rikers Towers. They moved like shadows, low to the ground, feeling every cold stone under their palms. The yard felt huge at night, a dark ocean with flashing lights cutting across it. Each time a searchlight swung by, they froze and pressed themselves flat against the gravel. Their breaths came out like small clouds in the cold air. Slow steps, a pause, then another slow step. They hugged the walls and used the long shadows as cover. The towers seemed close enough to touch. The guard silhouettes were black against the bright lights. Every muscle in his body screamed to run, but he kept steady. Fast thinking had brought him this far. Panic would ruin everything. Halfway across the yard, a dog barked. The sound cracked like a whip. Both men dropped to the ground and held very still. The barking stopped after a few seconds, and the yard fell quiet again. He felt the younger man shaking beside him. "Keep moving," he whispered. "Not yet. Wait for the light." They crawled toward the base of the outer wall. It was taller than he remembered, rough concrete cold to the touch. He felt around the rim with his fingers and found a rusted ladder bolted to the wall, an old maintenance ladder that might give them the lift they needed. His heart leapt. This was their chance. He signaled to the younger man and started to climb. Every rung creaked and moaned under his weight. The top of the wall was closer now, just a few more feet. He could feel the wind on his face and smell the city beyond like a faraway promise. The younger man followed, moving quicker than he had all night. At the very top he pulled himself up and swung his legs over. For one perfect moment, he sat with his feet dangling on the other side. The city lights shone like a pool of gold. Freedom felt real. He glanced back to help the younger man up, but then a sound, not a footstep or a radio. A deep, low engine noise from the service road outside the wall. Headlights spilled light over the outer perimeter. A van was pulling up, slow and purposeful. Their skin crawled. Who would be out here now? Visitors? A patrol? He turned toward the younger man to shout, but a sudden shout came from below, loud, angry, a guard's voice calling out names and orders. Lights flashed upward, blinding him. The younger man lost his footing on the top rung and slipped. For a heartbeat, he hung by one hand, fingers clawing for purchase. The world narrowed to a single breath. The city hummed beyond. The van idled. The guard's voice grew closer. Would the younger man fall? Would he be caught hanging on the other side of the wall? Or would someone reach out in time to grab him? The answer hung in the air like a gunshot, right before everything changed.
The younger man's hand slipped once, then tightened. His knuckles turned white as he clung to the top rung. Below him, the guard's voice grew louder, the beam of a flashlight swinging wildly across the yard. Alarms hadn't gone off yet, but the moment they were spotted, the entire jail would explode into chaos. "Grab my hand!" he hissed, leaning dangerously over the wall. Their fingers brushed once, missed, then finally locked together. With all his strength, he pulled the younger inmate up onto the ledge. For 1 second, they were both there, sitting on the wall, the city spread before them. Freedom, right there. But then the sirens blared. The guard had seen them. Red lights flashed, alarms screamed, and searchlights locked onto their bodies perched on the wall. Shouts filled the night. "Get down now!"
He looked at the city, so close. He looked at his partner, his face pale with fear. And then he looked at the armed guards pouring into the yard. They had a choice: jump into the unknown, or be dragged back inside. The younger man panicked, shaking his head. "We'll never make it," he cried. Before he could leap, officers swarmed the yard below, rifles pointed, spotlights burning into their eyes. There was no way out. Slowly, with their hands raised, they climbed back down the ladder into the waiting arms of the guards. They were tackled, slammed into the ground, and cuffed in seconds. The dream of freedom vanished under boots and handcuffs. Both men were dragged away, the sound of alarms still echoing behind them. They didn't make it out of Rikers, but their attempt became legend. Whispers of the ones who almost made it spread through the cell blocks for years. Some said they came closer than anyone before them. Some said their daring move proved that even Rikers Island wasn't unbreakable. And that's the story of one of the most shocking escape attempts Rikers Island had ever seen. A story of desperation, courage, and how close two men came to breaking free from one of America's toughest jails. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and comment below. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss more unbelievable prison stories like this. Your support helps us keep bringing these stories to life. Stay tuned, because there are more shocking tales from inside the walls of America's prisons, and you won't want to miss them.